Rascal Flatts is a great way to start this show. CMT named them among the 20 greatest men of country music. And in a conversation with Gary, Jodon, and Jay a couple of days ago, I asked them, who would you put on the list of who you think are the greatest men of country music? And they were quick to go back in history and name Hank Williams Sr. and then Merle Haggard and Johnny Cash, and then bringing it more up to date with Earl Thomas Conley, Randy Travis, and they also mentioned Vince Gill among who they thought were the greatest men of country music. And for those of you who are following the Flatts Tour, the Flatts Festival Tour this summer, you know it's all about black and white. Well, just so you know, during the interview they were all wearing black and white, with a few rhinestones sprinkled in. Gary had a few rhinestones on. Hey, and speaking of Vince Gill, I want to say congratulations because Vince just celebrated 20 years as being a member of the Grand Ole Opry. I talked with Vince and asked his thoughts on celebrating 20 years, and his first crack was he made a joke and said, well, that's a lot of trips to the concession stand. And then he turned around and on a more serious note, he said, when you really think about it, 20 years is a very young milestone. And he's right, many more to come. Hey, speaking of Vince, you know, we're on this 20 theme of 20 greatest men of country music, 20 years at the Grand Ole Opry. Vince has also won 20 Grammys. At least 20. I stopped counting at 20. Miranda Lambert, Ashley Monroe, and Angelina Presley, now known as Pistol Annies, spoke with them recently and got a chance to listen to the album before it's released. And wow, what a great record. And I was curious to know how this all came about. You know, how did the three of them come about? Because sometimes groups are put together from a record label, or I mean, there's a million different ways it can happen. And the way it happened was Miranda and Ashley had been writing songs together and had gotten along really well and become good friends. Then Ashley had been writing with and knew Angelina and brought her into the mix, and before long they were all three writing songs together, then recording songs, and now you have the Pistol Annies. And by the way, it's interesting, I think, to look at these photos. This next picture, it's interesting because it looks to me almost like a test photo. I don't know. I'm really looking forward to what's to come with Pistol Annies. Steve Holy, I spoke to Steve, and he has a new album coming out. You know, he has this new single out right now and a new video. And if you go back as a Steve Holy fan several years, 8 or 10 years, you may recall the song, which was a huge hit, called Good Morning Beautiful. Well, Steve told me that he has re-recorded that song for this new album, but it's not going to be the same version. It's going to be an acoustic version. So if you've seen Steve in concert over the last few years, it's that version. Not a live version, but it's an acoustic version of that song. Steve Warner is on my list of people to tell you about this week. I recently worked with him. I'm producing radio shows that he's hosting. If you'd like to hear those shows among other artists hosting radio shows, go to my website at shannoncountry.com, the news page, and I will link you to it. But Steve has just recently helped the Country Music Hall of Fame open a new exhibit on Chet Atkins. So the next time you're in Nashville, be sure to check that out. Okay, I ran into Heidi Newfield. I do remember the words that she's working on new music. Always glad to hear that. Last time I was here, I mentioned to you that I would have an on-camera interview with Jake Owen. I do not, because as things change, as they always do, I did do the interview with him, but it ended up being a radio interview instead of a television interview. But I will tell you a couple of things that he mentioned. Of course, he's out on the road with Keith Urban. He told me that his mom and dad were huge Keith Urban fans. And he also mentioned that being out on the road with Keith was an educational experience. He said he is learning so much from him, not only on a personal basis, but professionally on how he does business. And I want to get this straight, his quote. He said he's a class act, he's generous, and he's a genuine human being. And that's always good to hear, because sometimes you don't hear good things about some artists, but you always hear great things about Keith Urban. That's all for now. I'll wrap it up, and I'll look forward to talking to you next time. Check back in with me again soon. Have a great one. I'm Shannon McCombs. Come on, let's go. Come on. Thank you.